You're listening to the Paul and Philippe podcast. Prepare yourself for loads of unbiased nuances.
Even though Fernando Henrique Cardoso, for him, also had a very status of intellectual, extremely intelligent, and but at the difference of Lula, he was a scholar, professor, university professor, and so a very different background from the one of Lula. Knows how to speak, was very friend of the president of the United States in the 90s, Bill Clinton, but also of other leaders in Europe, for example, was always in contact with them. So the level or the quality were already very high, and the intensive use of international organizations in order to defend their own interests was also another characteristic of FHC, as is locally known, FHC. That's the way he's known. So Lula, despite having a very different background, has convinced, seduced very, very quickly, because he is also very intelligent. And knows and had a very clear project. He was respected, so to speak, in the project of projecting Brazil into international relations as having a very clear understanding of their interests. It's all the rise of the BRICS. Remember, that's the beginning of the recognition of a pool of countries that are not developed countries, but are rich countries, and are countries that have a lot of potentialities for world economy and world politics. So there was a certain level of respect, let's say, and somehow Lula knew how to handle that expectation regarding those countries, and somehow lead a way of defending southern interests and more specifically Brazilian interests. Even though obviously understand that in terms of internal politics, Lula is an icon. He's been in politics since the 70s during the dictatorship, and created the PT, the Labour Party, the Partido dos Trabalhadores, is one of the founders at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. Now, he has led the party from ever, I suppose. PT and Lula are one. And that's even one of the issues for the PT, which is when Lula is gone, who is going to replace Lula? That's one of the problematic that all the very, very important leaders normally have, which is to choose a successor. But on these 40 years, he's always been omnipresent in terms of internal politics, and is known as being a pragmatic, which in the language of certain is equality, and for other is a big problem, because pragmatic would mean that they change their mind according to the context. I do not see it pretty much that way. Obviously, the PT has a very ideological ground. It is based on the socialist principles, etc., traditional socialist principles, Marxist principles that he shares. Even though in terms of politics, this is not what he puts up front each time he engages in speeches or negotiation with whoever, especially in international politics. You won't hear Lula talking about Marxist ideology.
Even though he is deeply convicted of those ideals?
Convicted in
Marxist and socialist.
Yeah, at least traditionally, at least the PT is. There is a very big Marxist, leftist Marxist bases in the country, in Brazil, since ever. And in the case of South America, I would say that these leftists obviously had also its very specific historical development. They had to go through military dictatorship, have been persecuted. Look at Dilma Rousseff and other former presidents had been tortured, for example, during the military dictatorship. But some say they also participate in terrorist attacks, etc. So it's a very, very violent and troubling history of most of those who founded and participating in the building of the party from the 80s on, based on those socialist, Marxist principles, democratic principles, etc. But in a very specific historical context in which somehow to be leftist means to be anti-American.
Oh, okay.
There is this very
Of
automatic
the
link.
world, right?
Mhm.
While seeing the United States as like
Because of the military dictatorship,
capitalism.
because of the involvement of the United States, CIA, and other agencies in the support to those military dictatorship during the 60s and 70s, and the persecution that those people had to go through. So there is this anti-American sentiment for those who are the real, let's say, followers of all these ideological
Did this sentiment now
lines.
did this sentiment now fortify
So
in third president?
automatically, when you talk about foreign policy, to mean to be anti-American means to be anti-Israel, because
Okay.
well, America and Israel are allies, and to be pro-Palestinian. So it was quite obvious in the mind of many leaders in the PPP, but also followers in the PPP, and that in this 80 years old story of problematic relations between those two people, the Palestine people and the Israeli people, and that they had to be in support of the Palestinian because they were representing more of the South, the developing and the persecuted. So there was some kind of identification also, beyond the fact that Israel had been supported by America, somehow is being rejected as a possible ally. On that, it's the basic assumption that we hear the most, and which is the heart, let's say, the basis of how the PPP works. The agenda is chosen according to those basic traditional historical lines and sentiments that have been accumulated through these many experiences that they had to go through since the 60s and 70s.